Page 85, the Raccoon. The sun was already setting as I hurried my horse down the steep road to the Central Dawn Park in North Toronto. In the short time it took to go down the hill, I was transported from the busy city streets to a tranquil country setting where there was no trace of the city. Reaching the valley floor, the road led over a small bridge that crossed the Don River and then on to the Metropolitan Toronto Police Mounted Unit headquarters. It consisted of barns and stables and two houses that once made up the farm of a private estate. Two men stood at the entrance of the police stable. One was my sergeant and the other was the superintendent of the park. They were having a heated conversation and looked up only when my horse's metal shoes left the soft turf and hit the cobblestone in front of the building. The sergeant pulled his pipe out and grunted, "Good, you're here. Put your horse away. We've got a job for you." By the time I had unsaddled my horse, fed and watered him, and made my way back to the waiting men, the sun had sunk further behind the rim of the valley, leaving that glorious red that only city pollution can produce. Visibility was minimal. Between puffs on his pipe, the sergeant laid out my assignment. Apparently the park superintendent, who lived in a cottage just out of sight of where we stood, had noticed a raccoon high in one of the stately elms that shaded his house. It seemed that the raccoon was acting strangely aggressive and vicious, unusual for these semi-tame park animals. There'd been a rabies scare recently, and there was no sense taking any chances. "Take your pistol over there and humanely destroy that animal," came the directive. "Here's a feed bag to bring him back in. Be quick about it because it's getting dark." The street lights had just come on as the two men turned their backs on me and continued their conversation. I felt the weight of my holster to make sure that my trusty, if rusty, .32 caliber Colt was at my side, and then proceeded toward the crime scene. I'd had to check my gun because I hadn't had much occasion to use it, and frankly, wasn't very good with it. As my fingers ran through my ammunition pouch, I was relieved to find several extra bullets in there. Thank God I'd replaced them after wasting so many shots while trying to bag a pheasant during a particularly boring afternoon patrol in Mount Pleasant Cemetery about a month earlier. I don't know what had possessed me. I don't like hunting or killing creatures, and I was relieved when I had come to my senses before I hit the pheasant. Now here I was again, this time being sent as an executioner of a poor, distressed animal. I hoped that the raccoon had moved on to another part of the park, but as I approached the base of the tree, I could hear him hissing and snarling with that particular rattle that is peculiar to raccoons. He was still there. There was enough light from the nearby yard lamp to make out his furry shape and bright eyes. His white, gnashing teeth were also visible, but worst of all, I could detect a cascade of white foam drooling down over his lower jaw. A sure sign of distemper or rabies. "Well, there's nothing for it. He's just going to have to go," I said to myself. I drew my pistol and assumed the two-handled stance I'd been taught at police college. One quick, accurate, humane shot should do it. With my arms stretched full length, I sighted along the barrel and decided to put a round between his eyes and end the thing quickly. Who was I kidding? When I took firearms training, I was the worst in the class. I'm convinced that the only way that I passed target practice was because some of the shots from the other cadets training with me strayed onto respectable spots on my target. I had the bad habit of wincing and closing my eyes in anticipation of the bang, sort of a now you see it, now you don't technique that was hard to overcome. Hopefully this little bugger was close enough that I might be able to do the deed swiftly and successfully. I resumed my firing stance, cocked my revolver, and let fly in his general direction. My first shot was well planned because it trimmed off a large leafy branch about 3 feet above his head. This, of course, allowed more light onto the scene and made my target more visible. Now you're for it, I thought, as I fired my second shot, and was pleased to see that it struck a huge tree about 2 feet to his right. It startled the now really pissed off raccoon into turning and facing me full on, presenting a much better target area. I emptied all 6 chambers of my gun in this fashion without really approaching his immediate vicinity. I was also making quite a lot of noise, but I reloaded sheepishly, thankful again for the extra bullets in my pouch. Again I assumed the position, ready to restart the barrage. As I squeezed the trigger, the gun sounded a dull pop, and I could actually see the bullet leave the end of the barrel and arch to the ground about 6 feet in front of me. It was a dud, and as I looked up into the tree, I could tell that the raccoon was losing all respect for me. In fact, he was climbing down the trunk with his whole body shaking in a maddened tremor. He was much closer now, so I fired off 3 shots in rapid succession. He was suddenly very still, and as he clung to the tree and I breathed a sigh of relief, I blew the smoke off the end of my pistol and put it in my holster. I grabbed the bag in anticipation of his fall from the tree, but as I was straightening up, I heard his mad snarling resume. I had totally missed yet again, and he'd only been playing possum, or raccoon, as the case may be. And now he was coming for me. My second to last shot went wild, but as he was about to bite the barrel of my gun, I got off the headshot that I had originally intended. He departed the world in a quick, almost painless fashion. And as I stuffed him in the bag and looked at my watch, I realized that I'd been at least half an hour bagging my little friend. It was dark as I walked a short distance back to the stable where my sergeant and superintendent waited. The sergeant looked from the super to me and, slowly removing his pipe from his mouth, asked, "Did that raccoon have a gun too?"